Great. Well, why don't we just get started then? In time-honored ASOR tradition, they usually get started pretty promptly, so we can do that. So I want to say welcome to everyone here. My name is Jack Green. I am Associate Director at ACOR, American Center of Research in Amman, Jordan. And I'm chairing this session, this workshop called Online Photo Archives, Tools for Preserving and Engaging with Archaeological Heritage. And we'll be hearing from our speakers in a moment through pre-recorded videos. But they are all here present. So this is effectively a live format of workshop. But you'll be able to, of course, provide your comments and feedback. You can use the Q&A button. And Marta, if I miss anything, Marta Ostovich is here to help with any technical needs for our presenters and during the workshop. So the first part, I'll be introducing, saying a few words of introduction before the presentations. And then we'll be then moving on after that to Q&A and discussion. I think we won't have questions between the presentations because I think it could break up the continuity. We'll just go straight through the presentations, and they'll be presented in the same order as in the program online. So we're very pleased to be here today, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion in the Q&A, and I really want this to be an opportunity for really constructive dialogue between people who are involved in these kinds of projects. I think the ultimate aim of this is so that we can work together, collaborate, share our experiences, and maybe come up with new and original ideas. I just want to say that, first of all, the idea for this workshop came about during the development of the ACOR photo archive project based in Amman, Jordan, which I'll be presenting to you in my pre-recorded presentation in a moment. And this is in part due to the sort of realization that there were many different projects around doing similar things. So presenting images of archaeological and cultural heritage sites, and also sometimes objects as well, but generally in isolation from each other. So colleagues here at ACOR in Amman, including our archivist, Jessica Holland, who I believe is with us here today and is attending the session. And we look forward to hearing from Jessica as well in the Q&A, I hope too. We really realized that this is, we wanted to find ways to bring people together through workshops like archives and skill sharing workshops, but also to raise awareness of the archival resources through things like social media and photo essays and online engagement. So this workshop is really an extension of those efforts to raise awareness, but of course we're raising awareness within the ASOR community and the sort of archaeological community of all the Middle East in the United States and internationally. And the idea is to learn from each other. So I hope that we'll have the chance to explore some of the shared values, roles, objectives of these projects and support and engage with each other. And we can maybe come away with a sense of the importance of collaboration, sharing and building awareness of these kinds of archives. I think it's also important to provide a little bit of historical context here because, of course, digital projects have been developing over decades. But the recent wave of online image archives can really be traced to recent events in the Middle East, especially Syria and Iraq in 2014 and 2015, notably sites like Palmyra, Mosul, and Nimrud. These were among the most visible targets of destruction. And this prompted sort of some of the strongest reactions from the scholarly and the research community around the world. And so we also had the impact of conflict, continued conflict on cultural heritage sites and monuments, and of course people in Yemen. And while often less visible than Syria and Iraq, it's also been the focus of wanting to do more to document heritage sites and monuments. There have been a number of archives, online archives before this time, but there was this notable increase, which I think is really in part due to a desire for people to do something. And because of many people could not go to the region because of the conflicts or because of restrictions or dangers, the uploading of images of sites and monuments and landscapes from their own collections seemed to be the most obvious sort of thing to do. And of course, funding opportunities were arising in that area too. But of course, this kind of cultural heritage destruction is not the only type. I mean, there's the more mundane, more common forms of heritage destruction that happen every day due to urban encroachment and expansion and agricultural development, and often with limited resources to protect them. So many projects have also shifted to documentation and monitoring as tools for capturing cultural heritage before it disappears or changes, and thereby we preserve images of sites and landscapes at points in time. It can be potentially used to help to document places before they're destroyed or damaged, but unfortunately, these tools don't actually stop the destruction. But they can be used as awareness-raising tools to raise awareness of change and the rapidity of change and impact on these places. One of the key questions, therefore, is how can such archives be used to document changes to heritage over time? And so it'll be interesting to consider case studies of images that are used to aid reconstructions of damaged structures or objects, or as professional research tools for monitoring changes and threats to collections, sites, monuments in the region. But one key question here is, how effective are these tools in documenting and monitoring and preserving heritage? Also, the preservation of memory of places is also important, particularly for example, local communities and diaspora communities. This is, for example, one of the aspects of the Syrian Heritage Project, which we'll hear about a bit later in this session, and it's the focus of one of the presentations. And in fact, it could be argued that while each initiative has something different to offer and focuses on a discrete collection or content, there's the issue of raising awareness of the resources for community of researchers and heritage professionals, as well as the general public. And so this brings us to the question of who are the intended audiences of such image archives? And really, public access here is key for many of these online resources, the ability to find the data, find the images and discover them, but also increasing local and regional awareness through Arabic and other languages, not just English, for metadata is particularly important, particularly for site names. And this can show how there's a need for increased searchability, social media and educational resources in other languages other than English to make them more fully engaged resources within the region. And perhaps such archives should be meaningful as well to these local and diaspora communities, and you know, what role can they play in heritage protection and awareness raising? And as shown in Monica Hanna's plenary address yesterday, members of local communities can often be disconnected from their cultural heritage, and the process of foreign archaeologists doing field work or projects, often on a short-term basis, means that these well-meaning projects have limited long-term sustainable benefits for local communities. So there's a fundamental point here about the ethical obligation of archaeologists and heritage professionals to make these resources available and accessible. And perhaps that could be part of our conversation when we discuss the role of such archives in scholarly and public settings. So without further ado, I'd like us to move to the first presentation and just say, first of all, this is ACOR's photo archive as a tool for research and engagement in archaeological heritage, presented by myself. But I also want to acknowledge Jessica Holland, who is the archivist at ACOR, has also been heavily involved in the management and overseeing of much of this project. So Marta, if we could please go to the playback.
Hello, everyone. It's my great pleasure to talk to you today about the ACOR Photo Archive as a tool for research and engagement in archaeological heritage. The American Center of Research in Amman is well known for its active role in archaeology and heritage of Jordan over the past 50 years. I'd like to also acknowledge that we at ACOR also support a wide range of research across the humanities and social sciences, and that our image collections include photographs from several other countries in the MENA region other than Jordan. In this presentation, I'll firstly introduce the project and summarize the work we've done to date, and then I'll be sharing some of the ways in which the archive can be used through some case studies. And lastly, we'll be looking at the future for the photo archive. We currently have over 30,000 images digitized and uploaded onto our Starchive platform for public online access. The ACOR Photo Archive project has allowed us to connect with global audiences and those in Jordan in both English and in Arabic. And we're very grateful for the support provided by the US Department of Education through an American Overseas Research Center's Title VI grant between 2016 and 2020. This has enabled ACOR to digitize images, create the database, recruit support staff, and engage project archivists and specialist advisors. I want to acknowledge here the contributions from all of the people who have worked on the project over the years. There are many to thank, but I want to highlight a few people here. Glenn Corbett, who initiated the project, Jessica Holland, who began as a project archivist and as ACOR's archivist, has played a vital role in coordinating workflow and raising awareness. And also our metadata coordinator, assistant librarian Samia Khalaf Kafafi, who contributes much of the Arabic metadata and assists with local outreach in Jordan. The collections that we've added to the database include images from historian and photographer Jane Taylor, former Jordan Times editor Rami Khoury, scholar and author Linda K. Jacobs, and archaeologist George Bass. The Paul and Nancy Lapp collection includes images from their excavations and travels dating back to the 1950s. And the Bert de Vries collection comes from his time as ACOR director between 1988 and 1991. We recently added the collection of archaeologist Kenneth Russell. We're grateful to all of those who provided all their slides and photographs to us, as well as the knowledge and stories behind the images. And I just want to add that although Jordan is our main focus, we do have images from other countries in the MENA region, including Syria, Yemen, and Iran. It's important to note the historical context of the development of the ACOR Photo Archive. Although ACOR already had an important, or has an important institutional archive, the idea of preserving ACOR's photos came partly in response to the significant damage to sites in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen through conflict and deliberate targeting of monuments and museums, particularly from 2014. In this case, the need to help document disappearing or threatened heritage was a key motivation in the establishment of the archive. The Iron Age temple at the site of Ain Dara in Syria, with its elaborate basalt carvings, is one such recent example of cultural heritage destruction in a time of conflict. In 2018, the temple was reportedly bombed by Turkish warplanes, and that caused significant damage to the site. But here you see there are some images that we have from the Linda K. Jacobs collection as Ain Dara appeared in the 1980s, providing at least a snapshot of a more peaceful time. Jordan doesn't suffer from the same kind of destructions of sites and monuments due to conflict, though urban and agricultural development, as well as illicit digging, have a huge impact on archaeological sites, such as this looted early Bronze Age cemetery at Fifa near the Dead Sea. The image on the left comes from Jane Taylor in 1998, and the other was taken by Chad Hill for the Landscapes of the Dead project in 2016. These types of images can be used to monitor damage caused by looting over time and hopefully help drive actions towards site protection. These photographs of Byzantine and early Islamic structures at el Jamal in Jordan come from the Bert de Vries collection. The image on the right shows an upper story doorway precariously balanced with one stone hinged out. And according to Bert, several years ago, the wall toppled over completely due to people climbing on the monument. This highlights the overall fragility of such sites, but the picture could also be used to reconstruct this part of the building. This adds to the cultural heritage value of the photo archive, as they can play an active role in future reconstruction. Another case study here comes from the Hellenistic era site of Iraq al-Amir, just outside Amman. The image on the left shows the site during excavations in the early 1960s by Paul Lapp, documenting the site before its restoration by the Department of Antiquities and IFPO in the 1980s and 1990s, as you can see on the images in the center and the right. We see a dramatic restoration of the temple aimed at attracting tourism. The photos show how drastically the site and landscape have changed over time. The images in the Paul and Nancy Lapp collection provide not only a sense of the scale of the operations at the site, but also of many of the local workers involved in the project. Archaeological fieldwork photography often records information on people working on sites, but there can also be a conspicuous lack of information on the identities of local workforces. Alison Mickle has highlighted this gap in a recent article, where she states that local workers go unnamed or even unmentioned at all, appearing as distant silhouettes in photographs. Wherever possible, the ACOR Photo Archive includes the names of local workers and others where known, and we will continue to try to identify people in the images. This reminds us that these images are not only snapshots in time. When taken together and used with sources from other locations, a photo archive becomes a dynamic, transformative resource. The images can be used to engage with local communities and contribute to their histories. The collection also allows for an exploration of the history of archaeology. The photograph on the left is one of several in the archive which capture site visits in the 80s and 90s through the Jordanian organization, Friends of Archaeology. Also, upcoming additions to the archive will include images from ACOR's USAID-funded Sustainable Cultural Heritage through Engagement of Local Communities project, or SHEP, including recent documentation of site conservation, training, and educational activities. Now, searching for images on our database can be done through a simple keyword search or through filters on our website. And our platform provides a template on how to provide a credit line for an image. Anyone can click on Save As on an image and download a JPEG suitable for a PowerPoint, for example. And for higher quality TIFFs without watermarks, you can click Request Images, send us your information about the intended publication, and we'll be happy to manage your request. All the images we have are free for research and educational use, but commercial use is granted on a case-by-case basis. Now, while the creation of the Photo Archive database has been a major part of our project, so is engagement and outreach. The project has gained a growing audience of followers on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, allowing us to engage with new audiences in both English and Arabic. The preparation of photo essays on specific collections from individuals also helps build awareness. New narratives can be told and retold in multiple and often unexpected ways, drawing on the personal and professional context of why a particular set of images was taken in the first place. And this storytelling aspect also adds a very essential and personal meaning to these collections. We're also interested in gaining feedback from the archaeological community on the archive, and we'd love to receive suggestions for your future photo essays if you have them. We actively welcome feedback on how the collections may be used as an archaeological research tool, as well as a resource for cultural preservation. Digital outreach is only, of course, part of the picture, and ACOR is committed to in-person outreach wherever possible, and education, for example, through raising awareness of the photo archive to school librarians and educators in Jordan. Also, through an annual skills sharing workshop, ACOR has brought together archaeologists and professionals from libraries, museums, and archives in Jordan and beyond to collaborate and share their skills and knowledge. This has opened dialogue and created a community of practice in digital preservation. Lastly, we've discussed the use of the photo archive with US-based educators such as this group, who were visitors to Jordan from US community colleges and minority-serving institutions during a faculty development seminar held at ACOR. This is helping us to gather structured feedback on the use of our resource and also ideas for how it can be actively used in teaching. And this is leading us into new and exciting directions. We're really pleased to share information about a new opportunity through a grant from the US Department of Education, which will take us now into 2024. The project, the ACOR Digital Archive, developing a multimedia teaching and learning resource, aims to increase the archive's accessibility related to the wider Middle East, including Arabic descriptions, and better serving of area studies scholars and educators. Because we're expanding our multimedia content to include audio and video, we're rebranding as the ACOR Digital Archive. Lastly, we aim to create practical curricular materials based on the Digital Archive for Community College and MSI networks. And with that, I end this brief overview of the ACOR Photo Archive project, and I look forward to any feedback you may have during this session. And so I just want to thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Please unmute, John.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just going to now introduce our next speaker, who is Gabriel Rodriguez of Columbia University, who's co-authoring with Zainab Bahrani, also of Columbia University, who'll be speaking to us on the Mapping Mesopotamian Monuments project.
Rodriguez, and I will be discussing the Mapping Mesopotamian Monuments project. The Mapping Mesopotamian Monuments project, abbreviated here as MMM, is a documentation effort that has been in progress since 2012. The project is directed by Dr. Zainab Bahrani, Edith Parada Professor of Ancient Near Eastern Art and Archaeology at Columbia University, with funding from Columbia University's President's Global Innovation Fund, as well as the Crest Foundation and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Personally, I have worked on this project in my role as digital curator at the Media Center for Art History. Part of the Department of Art History and Archaeology at Columbia, the Media Center supports faculty research and student learning through innovative technologies. In collaboration with faculty principal investigators, we develop and support fieldwork and research projects, documenting, presenting, and interpreting works of art, architecture, and cultural heritage sites. Since first joining the fieldwork season in the spring of 2015, I have been fortunate enough to work with the MMM project team during each subsequent fieldwork campaign. The on-site documentation involved in the project aims to provide exhaustive descriptions and analyses of historical monuments by utilizing a range of tools with a focus on thorough photographic documentation. You can see here I am in the field in southeastern Turkey at the source of the Tigris River, taking a photograph of, with a zoom lens of a rock relief there. Since our first fieldwork season in 2013, our topographical survey has been documenting endangered monuments, rock reliefs, and architecture from ancient to modern in a region stretching from southeastern Anatolia and Iraqi Kurdistan to the Nineveh province in Iraq. You can see here is a map of all the sites we've visited. There's over 60 individual pins here. Many of them are stacked on top of one another. Taking cues from previous documentation projects developed with faculty in the department, we designed our field kit to produce diverse imaging results using limited equipment. For ease of interoperability with photographic equipment already in use by the Media Center, we exclusively utilize Nikon DSLRs and F-mount lenses. We found that the relatively high-resolution images produced by the Nikon D800 series were more than adequate for our documentation needs, while the camera was accessible enough to be operated by non-specialists. Each annual fieldwork period was limited to approximately 2 to 3 weeks, given the nature of the project, as well as funding considerations. The goal during these excursions was to document as many sites as possible in the allotted time and given geographic restrictions. Let's take a look again at the map. You can see here, most of the sites are clustered around areas where we stayed. So we stayed mainly in Erbil, in Suleymaniye, and in Diyarbakir, as well as Duhok. Generally, we tried to visit at least 2 sites in a given day, only allowing for a handful of hours of documentation per site. The portability of the documentation kit was especially important for some of the more remote sites. Additionally, the methodology of documentation was such that a general photographic survey would be feasible for most sites in under 3 hours. Here we have the stills kit and the panoramic photography kit here represented visually. You can see the idea is that all this equipment would fit into each individual backpack, and then there's also these drives on which the material would be stored, and those would be split between the various team members for safekeeping. In general, the MMM project features 3 modes of digital capture: high resolution images, both wide angle and detail views, panoramic images for the 360-degree panoramas, as we see here, and images systematically captured to produce 3D models using photogrammetric principles. Additionally, we have also made use of a gigapan rig for producing zoomable image composites. Using this workflow, all of these varieties of media can be produced using the same camera in different configurations. So let's take a look at the website itself. Here is the landing page. And as you can see here, if we go to the full catalog, here are the individual sites. These were all represented by those pins on the map in my earlier slide. Here, for example, are the Burke Lane reliefs. These are the ones, this is where I was standing in the river there. And so you can see here, if we scroll down to panoramas, notice that first of all of the images are organized by subject matter, as well as by media. So now here we are in the panoramas. And if I am to open up these panoramas, you can see, so this is approximately where I was standing in the river. This is a panorama though, and you can see the rock relief here in context up on the rock face here. Of course, we also have many detail stills of this same relief. Let me just delve into each individual media type quickly. The VR photography, you can see it's manual panorama creation. We use the camera on a panorama rig, take 10 individual photos with approximately 30% overlap between them, and then software stitches the rest. Here you can see the panorama rig in action with one of the members of our team, Dr. Helen Malco, here on the right, and she's about to put the camera on the panorama rig. And so here are the photos that make up a panorama. You can see here are 2 contextual photos. This is at the Merkuli relief in the Suleymaniye province of Iraqi Kurdistan. And now notice here in this next slide, we have, this is the rock relief itself in question. And you can see the overlap very clearly between these two. Now we're looking just to the right of the rock relief and looking straight up here. And we're looking straight down. The panorama head and the photographer are both get stitched out in the final product. The final product looks like this. This is what we call an equirectangular projection of the panorama. So it's represented. It's a two-dimensional representation of the spherical panorama. So I'll return more to the panoramas when we look again at one of the monument pages on the site itself. Let me just quickly discuss how we went about photogrammetry from digital images in the field. We used a quick 3D modeling technique in the field using the principles of photogrammetry. The key factors here are our coverage of the subject as well as the depth of field. You want them to be as crisp as possible, each individual image. So you want a very, very deep depth of field so that everything is in focus. And so, yeah, so here we can see some screenshots of Agisoft Metashape, formerly known as Agisoft PhotoScan. Here we have the individual photographs that were captured to create this model. And here's the model sort of in progress. We have the individual locations of the approximately 30 or so shots that I took for this. And then we have, this is what they would call the sparse cloud. So just barely visible. And now we have the textured mesh. And here now we have the photographic information has been, is now incorporated onto the textured mesh. And then finally, we have what they call the dense cloud. And let's view this panoramic model, this photogrammetric model as we see it on the website. I mean, you can really see, we have fully interactive, and you can really see the depth of the of the rock relief on the rock face. And again, this is derived only from about 30 individual photographs. I think even less. I think only about 20 in this particular case. Here's another example of panoramic photography and photogrammetric modeling. We can see here, this is the Darbendi Gar relief, also in the Suleymaniye province of Iraqi Kurdistan. And you can see here's a panorama of the context of the relief. Let's turn around and you really get to see where this relief is located in this gorge. And then if we are to zoom in, this is a panorama that was taken with a slightly later workflow. We really do get a very good zoom on there. Then if we were to zoom back out, you can really see the rock relief is quite high up on the rock face, and it's also much larger than human scale. So again, using only about 30 or 40 or so photos, we can make a photogrammetric model of the rock relief. All these photos were shot mainly from below, although thankfully with this rock relief, I was able to climb sort of to the opposite slope to be able to take photos kind of from a higher vantage point. And so again, all of these photographs were run through the Agisoft Metashape software, and what we got was a three-dimensional model. And you really see how this rock relief interacts with the rock face here. The model really shows you that in a way that the photographs do not. Finally, let's discuss gigapixel photography. Here's an example of a gigapan. This is taken at Chenes Bavian in the province of Nineveh in Iraqi Kurdistan. And as you can see, so this is a composite photo of over 400 images, all taken with a zoom lens on a robotic gigapan rig. And you can see here, if we were to zoom in, it allows for quite deep zoom because of all of the photos that went into making this one composite. So within this one image, we can really zoom into almost any part and really see quite detailed views of the various reliefs that are associated with this particular site. And lastly, I'd like to discuss the catalog entries themselves. The digital record that is created with this documentation is combined on the website with detailed stylistic, iconographical, and historical analysis, all produced by doctoral or postdoctoral students here at Columbia. They also include bibliographical resources, as well as a selection of historical images and drawings. So if we are to look at, say, let's look at Mercouli, the site we just saw the panorama. So here's the relief. Again, notice here we have the site profile that has it actually incorporates the images, the media, so you can really get a sense of the media itself. And if we're to go back to Mercouli here, you can see here we have the relief. And under description, you can see here, for example, it links directly to the panorama. So this is the panorama that we saw the individual components of that produced this panorama. All right. So I invite you to take a look at what we have available in this catalog. At this point, it is for authenticated users only, but I would reach out if you are interested. Lastly, I'd like to thank Dr. Green for moderating this workshop, and I'd like to thank ASOR for organizing this conference, especially given such unique circumstances. Thank you very much, and I hope to discuss further with you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Gabe. Am I muted or no? I'm not muted. Thank you so much, Gabe, for a wonderful presentation. Amazing images as well, and I'm sure there are going to be some questions, technical questions about things like storage and how you deal with those kinds of images as well within your database. But these questions will wait until the Q&A and discussion, but you can also put those questions in the chat box. Thank you so much. Our next presentation will be by Foy Scalf and Anne Flannery of the Oriental Institute, the University of Chicago. It's entitled Persepolis from Above and Below, a case study in how analog and digital archives have shaped a city.
We'd like to thank Jack Green for inviting us to give this presentation here, and we'd also like to thank ASOR for putting on this virtual conference and allowing us all still to have a conference during the crazy times of 2020. What we want to talk to you today about is the Oriental Institute's integrated database project that includes a large selection of digitized archival photographs, among other things, and discuss how those photographs have been used in a number of case studies. In this case, we are selecting the site of Persepolis as our main case study. But of course, you could select a number of other sites. Persepolis was selected just because there are a number of recent exhibitions and films and other monographs on the site that we can use as a good case study to see how archival photography is put to use in the academic and scholarly world, and also within cultural heritage management, which was the theme of this session today, about how online photo archives can be used as tools for preservation and engagement. So at the Oriental Institute, over the last 8 to 10 years, we've been working to make all of the collections inside the Institute available to the general public and scholars through a website and a project that we call the Integrated Database. And all of the Institute's main divisions, the museum, the library, the archives, our landscape archaeology lab, and our digital media are all put into this one database system, which you can access from the URL on the slide. And so going in and doing any searching in there, you will see records from across all of these different departments. And this includes both our photo archives, which is basically another term for all of our digital images. So the photo archives tab here from our online collection search really represents records for all the digital images that we have inside the database, and also the museum archives. So all the archival photos that have been digitized over the past 35 to 40 years and put into the database. And what's interesting, or perhaps somewhat unique about this, of course, many institutions, museums especially, this is becoming standard, right? Getting your collection online and available to the public, and getting all the information that you have out and accessible. So outside of these very small communities who had sort of control over this information before, and getting this out to scholars so that they can use it and make use of it, both in the world of academia, but then also for cultural heritage preservation research as well. And the one kind of unique thing that we're doing at the Oriental Institute is we're trying to integrate, that's why we call it the Integrated Database Project, integrate this information together by linking the records across departments to each other. So that's the other thing about this system, is that we're all within one software platform. When I say we all of our departments are in one software platform. It's called EMU. It's currently owned by the company called Axial. And we link the records together so that users can jump from one record to the other. So as you see here on the screen in your upper left, this is a record for a museum object, right? The large bull's head from Persepolis. In the lower part of the screen, that's linked to the photo archive record, or again, the digital media file. And that record is also then linked to the archival record for that physical negative in the collection of the museum archives at the Oriental Institute. So all of these then are linked together. You can find them, search them, sort them all together in one platform. And it also allows us inside the Institute to further collaborate across our departments in a much more efficient way. So this is our basic platform for making our photographic archives available to the general public online, and also in the back end, it allows us to manage those collections internally. And from this material, we can begin to look at the archival photography of Persepolis as a case study, both in site documentation, but then also in site imagination. So how do these images that have been taken of the site shape how we think of the site and think of the ancient world?
So we're focusing on Persepolis today, which was an excavation that the University of Chicago undertook in the 1930s. The photographic documentation of this site is extensive. We have a variety of photographs as well as negatives and photo albums. Of course, documenting archaeological sites with photography is not a new practice as of the 1930s. This was something that was beginning in the mid-19th century, along with the birth of photography, of course. Here we have an example from the Nelson collection. It's by Severine. It's from the late 19th century. And you can see the technology, of course, creates a certain atmosphere in the photograph, that being blurred and faded. But there is an austerity and sort of a romantic element to documentation that goes hand in hand with archaeological documentation. In the next photograph, you see the 1930s, from the University of Chicago's excavation. It's a similar photograph, but it's clearer. So by the 20th century, the images are sharper, the technology is better, and yet by the nature of the black and white photograph, you have very strong contrast, which gives it a dramatic flair. So here we can see that this is a documenting medium. This is clear, but at some point it also becomes a representative medium. And then what we're trying to examine critically here is how this turn, happening very quickly simultaneously, affects the imagination of these sites and how we view them within archives, but also exhibitions and reenactments.
Looking at how these archival images are put to use, and this has been commented on by a lot of our colleagues, and a number of papers here at ASOR will cover these topics in various details. But when we look at this, we can see that there are a lot of things missing from the site, right? This is actually a photo mosaic. So this is a number of archival images that have been scanned and then overlain over top of each other. So you can see the whole Apadana stairway. And there's a lone figure out in the far left. And that lone figure is not supposed to be the central part or any kind of focus of the image. Of course, the figure is there for scale. And in the rest of the image, like many of these images and very common in images from this period, people and color are not present, right? So people not being present generally as part of the sort of romanticized notion of these sites, but then also by nature of the medium, we get these stark black and white colors. And of course, we know based on colleagues' work that is ongoing, people like Alexander Nagel have been doing a lot of work to, in a sense, recolorize these ancient sites. And we tend to think of these ancient sites in these monochromatic ways. Archival photography has helped shape that image in our imagination of these sites as these monochromatic black and white images. We display these images and we tend to think of them as images of factual representation. But of course, we're not getting that. We're getting sites at a particular time, at a particular place. There's some embedded assumptions and frameworks that go along with this. And I thought that when the OI recently, a number of years ago now, put on an exhibit about Persepolis, I wanted to use this as part of our case study. This was curated by Kirsten Newman, and it had this lovely subtitle, Images of an Empire. And I think this, in a way, encapsulates for us many of the issues that we want to raise here. I mean, we know that this is a session that's about the use of online photographic archives, but we need to keep in mind that these images are not purely unfiltered neutral things, right? That's the big catchword now in all of these studies, right? And people are saying museums are not neutral, archives are not neutral. I mean, of course, nothing is neutral, but there's a point to be made here. And so when we think about Persepolis as images of an empire, you can take the sort of positivist approach or the superficial approach and say, okay, well, we're looking at the remains of the Achaemenid Empire, right? So we're looking at a royal site built as part of this multinational empire. But on the other hand, these images are of a different empire, right? They're of a Western empire, because these images are taken right out after World War I, and they're taken with a technology, aerial photography, that was, to use a colonial term, pioneered during World War I. But these images are also a witness to this other empire. It's not a coincidence that after 1919, the Oriental Institute embarks on many of these major excavations, right? These images really encapsulate a lot of these issues surrounding the framework for how they're taken. So the main thing that we want to sort of get across when we're talking about this is that, yes, we can use these images for documentation. Yes, they do document antiquities and sites and archaeological heritage at a place and time, but we also want to keep in mind some of these other features that these photographs are representative of. One thing I want to sort of, put out there for discussion is there's lots of talk these days about, for example, quote unquote, decolonizing the archive. Well, the reality is it's impossible to decolonize the archive in the sense that these images, so let's take the examples that we're talking about, aerial photography of Persepolis in the 1930s, it was part of a larger colonial endeavor. Even if the people on the ground had good motivations and all of that, it's still part of this larger colonial context that we can't just erase. There's no way to take those images out of that context. So these are the kind of issues we face. And so what we're sort of arguing for here is not using these photo archives for these purposes, but to use them in a critically informed way.
And we know we've raised more questions than we were able to answer in this presentation, but just to follow up with what Foy said, we recognize that photography is a medium that mediates the viewer and reality, and there is always a disconnect there. It's just as these technologies and augmented realities become more sophisticated, it's important to keep these critical questions coming at not only ourselves, but the viewer, and to continue to explore photo archives and the worlds that they're creating through these technologies.
So we'd like to thank everybody for participating, and we look forward to answering questions and being part of the discussion. So we thank Jack Green again for inviting us, and also ASOR for hosting a great virtual conference.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Foy and Anne. That was a really great presentation, and already there are some very important points being raised, and I think the topic of decolonization is a really important one. I'm sure that will become part of the discussion later on. So I still ask for our audience members and participants to hold their questions for now, and maybe they can add them into the chat box, but we'll be focusing on more discussion shortly. But before we do, we have two more presentations, and the next one is presented by Claudia Burig of the Deutsches Archaeologisches Institut in Berlin, and Benjamin Ducker, also of the Deutsches Archaeologisches Institut, and it's on the Syrian Heritage Photo Archive in the DAI's open online infrastructure. So looking forward to your presentation.
I don't hear any audio.
Hello, I can't hear anything.
Me neither.
I can't hear the audio either. So if the audio is indeed missing from the video, then what I would do is just start over with the presentation, and I'll just do the audio live, if that is okay.
That should be fine, as long as
we stay within that.
Let's see if there's a problem with maybe the playback or.
Okay.
Seems to be so.
It played back fine for me, okay. Locally, but.
Okay. So I would suggest that we do that, if that's okay with you, Benjamin, to present alongside.
Right. So let's go. All right. So I will be presenting the Syrian Heritage Photo Archive on behalf of myself and Claudia Bürichsen. So I am, Claudia is the department director of our Damascus department, and I'm with the Science IT, both based in Berlin. Yeah, so the first few slides were supposed to just give you a very short introduction on the archaeology of Syria. As you know, Syria is in a quite dramatic situation at the moment. That includes its World Heritage Site. Each and every single one of the Syrian World Heritage Sites is in some way affected by the currently still more or less ongoing armed conflict. And the DAI, or rather the German Foreign Ministry, under whose auspices the German Archaeological Institute operates, has been investing quite a lot of money into actions for the cultural heritage of Syria. And the Syrian Heritage Archive project is one such project. Yeah, I mean, you have all read the news in the recent years. I don't believe I have to say too much about it. The DAI, of course, has a very long research tradition in Syria and the Near East. It goes back at least to the late 19th century. The DAI itself is 191 years old now. So the Syrian Heritage Archive project, you can see that here, is concerned with a lot of activities to digitize and publish archived material, photos, drawings, maps. Today we are going to focus on the photographic elements of the archive, but there is of course a lot more. There's a lot more that is being done at the Institute, at Claudia's branch as well. Digitizing maps, georeferencing maps, publishing archives digitally. And I hope I will be able to give you a quick tour in a moment where you can see how it all comes together. So the Syrian Heritage Archive project in particular is run by two institutions. That's us, the Archaeological Institute, the DAI, and the Museum of Islamic Art in Berlin. And both of these institutions have large image collections from Syria, and these have been merged within the framework of the Syrian Heritage Archive project. Just if you want to have a little bit more information on the German Archaeological Institute, I suggest you just take a look at our web pages. You'll find our history and our departmental structures there. It's probably just worth noting here that we're not a university institution. We're part of the German Foreign Ministry, which has, of course, its very distinct advantages and disadvantages. In this case, a lot of advantages. Because we can work with the ministerial budget. The ministry itself is very interested in implementing activities in North Africa and the Near East to improve the situation there. That's sort of the strategy of the government in Germany at the moment anyway, and we fit right in there with this ARCANET, Archaeological Heritage Network initiative. Yeah, which is, as you can see, funded by money from the Foreign Office. And then we go to our actual data infrastructure. What you see here is our most popular component. That's the Arachne database. And this one has been built since the mid-1990s, and it contains about 4 million records at this point on all sorts of archaeological sites and objects. It's a very heavily structured research database, and by far the most popular one of our offerings. We get a short tour through it now. Yeah, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type in the signature for the Syrian Heritage Archive project, which is SYRHER, and you can see that it comes up with the search results. I hope the image is clear enough, but on the upper left there, you see that we have about 120,000-30,000 or so images from these archives in the collection. And you see these images, they also include scanned maps, and then not just photographies of monuments and sites. And that is subdivided again by the two major contributors, the German Archaeological Institute and the Museum of Islamic Art. You can see that on the left. left-hand side of the screen. Okay, so now we go to the entries for the Syrian Heritage Archive project. Okay, and that's the one, these are the ones from the Museum of Islamic Art. Okay, now I'm just going to click on one of these images. You see they are all outfitted with a lot of metadata, a lot of descriptive information, corporate information, etc. Rights management is quite an issue in large collections like these from more than one source. I'm sure we're going to discuss that within this session today. Now, what I want to show you is how heavily this data is linked. So on the list to the left, you have a list of linked places. These images have been linked to, among other things, among many other aspects, to geography, to places, topography, if you like. You can see here they're linked, in this case, to the site of Palmyra. So that what this does is sort of a drill down search. Now it initiates a search for images from Palmyra within the Syrian Heritage Archive collection. You can drill down further. You see that on the left here. We go to the Museum of Palmyra now. And the result will be images that are of museum items. Okay. And now the next thing will be to show you how we link out of Arachne into other components of our infrastructure. Our infrastructure is quite heterogeneous. These different components, they all have their own individual history, but they're all linked together now. You can see that this is the individual entry for one of these museum images. On the left, you see that there's quite a bit of metadata. Most of it is in German. I'm sorry to say, that's just how it has been entered. The user interface can be switched to English, but not all of the available metadata has been translated to other languages. Okay, so now you have a locality link here, a geographic link. If we click on this, it takes us to a different platform, which is our Gazetteer. And the Gazetteer is a research data platform which provides a central and authoritative registry of ancient sites and some modern sites that are meaningful for us. In this case, you can see here that's the Museum of Palmyra. It works pretty much like you would expect from a mapping service. As you can see, we also use Google background maps. We're actually planning to switch that at some point in the future, but you can see that there's hierarchical data in there. It has multiple translations into different languages. That's one of the elements of all of the Gazetteer entries. So we use local translations and transcriptions as well. And there is the link back again into the Arachne system that was a moment ago at the bottom of the screen. You can see how these systems are all linked with each other. And these are all heavily structured systems. We have a similarity search. So if I click on the similarity search, it doesn't show much because there really isn't much that is too similar to the Museum of Palmyra. But there is, as you can see, as you will see next, there is also a search to simply look for places within the neighborhood. And here you go. There's a list of other relevant archaeological or historical places in the neighborhood of the museum. And from there we go to the next place, the Temple of Baal, the great temple of, no, sorry, Baal Shamin. Yeah. The lesser one in Palmyra. Yeah. Okay. So as the final component of our research data infrastructure, I'm going to show you a more powerful platform for geographical data. Now we have really produced a lot of geographic data recently. Our GeoServer is the platform we use for topographic maps, for anything that has a spatial representation in the form of plans, maps, etc. And we have really found that a lot of research data is really most easily accessed and browsed and searched and understood if you can present it geographically in the form of maps. Maps are always a fantastic entry point to data, including image collection. It's just so much easier to make sense of things in a geographical context. So we have decided to put a lot of work into that. You can see here some of the results. These are all geodata, so-called layers, geodata sets. If you know how to use a GIS, then you can connect with your desktop GIS with the system, or you can use the online mapping facilities. This here is, of course, the layout of Palmyra. So this is based on data that Claudia Bürich and her co-workers have produced over the last years at the Damascus branch. It's data that was available in published book form before by a volume done by Klaus Schnedelbach in 2008, the Topographia Palmyrena. But this is the digital version, which has been georeferenced and edited heavily in GIS. And as you will see in a moment, these footprints here, the geographic objects, they're also linked with what we call attribute data. So that's basically the data structure behind every one of these buildings here. And these again can be linked via URLs. They can be linked to other web pages. They can be linked to images. In this case, we use a URL link back into the Arachne database, because here we can simply jump from between contexts, the geographic context of the Great Temple and the image-based, the collection context, as you see it in the Arachne database. And in this way, you can go back and forth and across the different systems. And that's really all for the quick tour. And with this last slide, we would like to thank everybody who has been contributing work to this project. There have been a lot more people involved in this project. This list is not nearly enough to do justice to all of them, but here's just a small list. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benjamin, and also for being so professional in delivering this unexpectedly, not partially recorded, but adding your voice to it. So thank you so much for that flexibility. It's extremely technical, obviously, and there's going to be some questions about technical issues, I'm sure, that will come up, given the scale of your database there and what you're doing with it. But before we do that, we're going to have the final presentation. And the final presentation is from Elizabeth Macaulay Lewis of the Graduate Center of the City of University of New York. And it's co-authored by Sean Leatherbury of the University of College Dublin and Miranda Williams of the University of Oxford. And it's on the topic of using MENA ASOR online photo archive for teaching, publication, research and heritage work in the Middle East and North Africa.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Macaulay Lewis. I'm delighted to be participating in ASOR's annual meeting, virtual annual meeting this year in 2020. I'm delighted to present the MENA ASOR online photo archive in this session, online photo archives, tools for preserving and engaging with archaeological heritage. What I'm going to do today is show you a few PowerPoint slides about our website and then take you to the website and do a demo for you. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. So the MENA ASOR online photo archive is an online photo archive based at the University of Oxford. There are 3 pictures you can see here from Damascus, from Petra, and from Luxor. So Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, to highlight a little bit of the range of what we have on our website. So a couple of specific details first. So right now, as of September 15th, 2020, we have almost 74,000 photographs online from the MENA region and adjacent regions. There's significant coverage of major sites in Syria and Jordan. This project developed in 2010 through the work of Judith Mackenzie. And as a result, there was a real desire to try and get large numbers of images that were curated by experts and taken by archaeologists. So we were a source that people could trust. These images are labeled in English and in Arabic to facilitate use in the region. That was something we felt very strongly about, that many of our colleagues in the region, as I'm sure this audience well knows, has difficulty even before the pandemic traveling to other countries or accessing material in other countries. So we believed that by creating this website and also having the labels in English and Arabic, that would facilitate a lot of use in the region. What we've done is we have DAMS, which is an online platform. It's an open access software, which has been modified by the IT officer at the School of Archaeology in Oxford. and allows us to, rather than having a set database, to organize our information through the metadata. So we have a lot of metadata embedded with the photographs, which if you open it up in Bridge or Lightbox or other types of photo editing software, you'll be able to see the resolution, you'll be able to see when it was taken and by whom it was taken. So these images can be downloaded at various resolutions for web, teaching, research, and publication. It can be used for any of those purposes. Sets of images can also be downloaded. So images can be organized to facilitate use from general shots to specific details, which allows it to work very well for specialists. The other thing that's very important is to note that all photographs are free for download and use for any purpose. There are no forms, no watermarks. All you have to do is acknowledge Manar al-Athar and the photographer. For example, here I put up an example. Just a couple of things to note. We have kind of current and upcoming editions. We have about another 4,000 photographs of Islamic period buildings from Damascus, which is our priority to get up. We have 7,000 photographs of mosques in Cairo, as well as a number of photographs from Libya for which we've applied for funding to put on. But we have another 100,000 photographs that still need to be edited and uploaded. So as you can see, this is very much a work in progress, but we're delighted that almost 74,000 images are already online. You can find us on social media at Twitter and Facebook in particular. I will say we're new to Instagram, and so we're watching out for more, but right now it's not as a significant effort, but we believe we'll be doing more there, which is a natural place for us to be. And I've included the contact information of 3 of the individuals who are involved in running the project. Ina Jacobs, who's the Oxford director, myself, who's the director, and then Miranda Williams, who is our deputy director. So with that, I'd now like to take you to look at the website. So I'm using Google Chrome here to give you a sense of what the website looks like. On the top, we have home, photo archive, copyright, future plans, support us, team, contact. You can see everything is labeled in English and in Arabic. So what I'd like to do, you can look at the homepage. It talks a little bit about the aims of the project, but you can also then get into the nitty gritty, if you will, by going to the image archive. So the one thing I would note is that you can see the different regions here. So you can go in by region, but right now I'm just going to take you into the kind of home starting archive page. It's important to note, first of all, that you can change the language. So right now it's set up in English, but you could change to use any of these other number of modern languages to help facilitate the use of instruction, understanding that it might be helpful for you to have it in a different language than English. So there are a number of different ways that you can search. As you can see, I was just doing a few things there. You can search for individual sites and images, and you can also work in themes. So I'm just going to do a basic search here for right now. So I'm going to put in mosque, let's put in Damascus. And so immediately that pulls up a highly recognizable building that you might want a very particular image of. For example, so we have the Great Mosque of Damascus here. And let's say you wanted a detail of the famous mosaics. These mosaics, of course, are often used as a topic of debate in, say, early Islamic art and whether or not this symbolizes paradise or the Barada River. But what you can see here is you have a number of different options for downloading. So you can take the high resolution TIFF, which is at 300 PPI or DPI, which is fantastic because that means you can just print it and use it for a book. At the same time, if you just want to pop it up on the web, you have lower resolutions. It also has all the information about it. So it says who took it, when it was taken, the image size. So you really have a lot of useful information. For those of us who are dealing with archaeological sites who may have changed over time, knowing, of course, the year and the time that a building was photographed is very helpful because we know that these are before the war, for example, in Syria. So here you can also see that there's an original theme. So you can come in to the theme here and take a look at this one. And so you see there are all these little different buttons that you can push here. So let's go here. So this allows you to do a full screen preview to see if you'd like it. And you can go back. And at the same time, then you can also email it. So you can send it to somebody who you think it might be useful to send to. Now, let's go back here to themes. So it takes a moment to load. You can also go through and look by themes. So these are organized right now. You can see Alexandria and Algeria, so it's done alphabetically. But let's say, for example, you wanted to go down to let's go to TIMGAD and say you would like to have all the 23 images that we have of the Arch of Trajan. So you can say view all, download, contact sheet, or share. So I'm going to go to download, and it'll show you that you can download the original size, low res, PowerPrint, or web. So I'm going to do original and use original if it's not selected, that, and you can download it as a zip. And so it might says we might take a while, but then you could download, for example, all of the images that you need, and it would have different shots of the Arch of Trajan. So it can be very, very helpful for you to do that. Now, I'm showing you how this would work, and it's taking some time, but that gives you a sense of how that in fact works. It's very, very useful, particularly if you're trying to study a building right now that we don't have access to, not only due to the pandemic, but due to political instability or other things like that. So I'm just gonna now just do a slightly different search just to show you what's happening. Obviously it would take time, but it downloads because it's downloading 23 high resolution images. So for the moment though, we're gonna go in here. I wanna look at Caracalla, and I wanna see about his arches in North Africa. And so what you can also see here is then this helps you to search in a different way. Okay, so you can see that the file is downloading here in the background, and I can still continue to still use the site. And as you can see, it's downloading pretty quickly. And so one of the things that's really helpful here, if I want to look at the arch, this arch here, I can see when it was taken. So this is 2013, the copy of it. And then if I just want to download this one image, I can download this high resolution image, and it comes down like that. And I can then go and open it in Photoshop or Bridge, manipulate the image, look at it, and see the metadata as well. So it really is a very powerful resource and tool. You can search for mosaics. The thing I would also note about the coverage is it really covers the MENA region from basically 300 BC and trying to run up as much as we can towards the present day, which is a huge scope of different materials. So it will be very useful to archaeologists, art historians, cultural heritage, researchers who are basically looking at anything from the Hellenistic, Roman, late antique, Byzantine, and into the Islamic periods. So we're very excited about this resource. We hope that you will use it regularly and download lots of images and share it with your friends and publish images from the website as well. But that's basically what I have and I'd like to present today. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer questions in the Q&A.
Great, thank you so much, Lizzie, for an excellent presentation and the co-authors. And I want to thank all of the presenters for their contributions to this workshop. First of all, in terms of reaching out to them and asking them if they'd be willing to be part of this workshop, and also through the whole process of getting their presentations done and recorded and uploaded. And yeah, I think they've all done a wonderful job, and we'll now have time to answer questions, ask questions, and also to discuss some of the key themes of this workshop. I will just make a couple of very brief observations that I think what we've seen here is mostly, it's really presenting what the projects do currently, and I think that's very, very useful. But I think also we need to think about perhaps what is it that are maybe the common challenges or needs from both the preservation part of side of things, but also the engagement and raising of awareness. What I'd like to do is actually, first of all, to open it up to the contributors and the presenters of the workshop, to allow them to respond in general to some of these questions, and also to respond to each other's presentations before we open it up to other questions. There were some questions in the chat box. So I'd like to open it up now, if possible, to the participants of the session. Great. Okay. And co-authors as well, if there, and Jessica is here as well from the ACOR, that's wonderful. Great. So yeah, feel free to, I don't want to say to anyone to start, but I would like to ask if you want to unmute yourself, and please feel free to share any initial thoughts on what we've seen today. Who wants to go first? Elizabeth, Lizzie?
Sure, I guess so. First of all, it was very interesting to see because there are really a very wide range of different approaches, and the question of a kind of the colonialization and decolonizing is, I think, a theme that many of us are intrinsically kind of interested in, even if we didn't explicitly state it or not, because of kind of archaeology always having a colonial dynamic. So I think it was great that, that Foy and Anne brought that up in their presentation, because it's something that I think we all are thinking about, even if we don't necessarily articulate it. It's something obviously that we all need to continue to do. And so I guess that's one of the reasons, certainly for us as a project, why we wanted it to be as open access as it could be. And, considering the project started before the kind of wars started, or this set of wars started, I should say, was just something we were cognizant about. But I think it seems that the community is very committed to that. I did have one question for the Mapping Mesopotamia project, if I may. Which is, because I was looking at the site, what was the rationale for having to have kind of registered users? Was that because of some of the sensitivities about the monuments and protecting the monuments?
Yeah, I think I'll take that from Gabe. Yeah, that was exactly the rationale. That, well, first of all, it was a work in progress, and second of all, the ISIS occupation started. I mean, ISIS took over Mosul and occupied Mosul just a couple of months after our 2013 season. So it really didn't seem like the right time to make it open access. And in fact, we had a lot of pressure from colleagues to make it open access. And we resisted because it just didn't make any sense. So I think we have to be cautious to just use these kinds of expressions across the board, such as, well, everything should be open access. I don't think that's true. I think it depends on the situation. So in each case, I think we have to consider carefully what is the best thing to do at that moment. I mean, right now we're beginning to cautiously consider making it completely open access. I say cautiously consider. We're finalizing some of the entries and translating them into Arabic, Kurdish, and Turkish. And when all of that is done, we hope to make it completely open access for everybody. But we certainly didn't want to rush into it. One thing that occurred to me as I listened to all of your really terrific talks, and I was fascinated to see what you were all doing, is that, well, when colleagues have heard that we're doing this, very often they've said, oh, but why are you doing this? There's too much overlap. Everybody's doing this. And now that I've heard all of your work, I see that it's actually very complementary. We're all doing entirely different things, and each one of our projects is actually very useful. So I think it's good to have multiple projects rather than to say we shouldn't have overlap. So that's my thought about that.
Well, also you have other challenges as well, because if you're trying to translate it also into Kurdish, Turkish, and Arabic, that's a very complex undertaking for some of the sites where we're only dealing in some ways with English and Arabic, which is complicated enough, but to trying to have that equity across the region and acknowledging the different communities is a testament also to the type of work that your project is doing.
Right. I mean, and I felt really strongly about that, because we could have opened it in English first and then added the other languages, or we could have opened it in English and Arabic first and then the other languages. But as a matter of principle, and it's an ideological stance that I have, that would be sending the wrong message. And to open it at first as a multilingual site that represents all the languages of the region of Mesopotamia, to me made more sense.
Thank you very much, Zainab, and also Lizzie, for the thoughts on this. And I just wanted to maybe open it up a little bit further to this idea of how these archives, they're very useful, of course, for the research purpose and for scholars and for cultural heritage professionals. But the idea of actively engaging with local communities or diaspora communities, the non-specialists, but the people for whom these sites and monuments may have a lot of additional cultural value. Is this something that you think this is something that one of the directions that these archives could be going in? Or do you think that they should be remaining mostly really primarily for the research purpose or preservation purpose? Are there any thoughts on this?
I think ideally, if we're committed to decolonizing, then we want everyone in the region to use it, and that would be for education. So it'd be interesting actually to hear from you more about the curricular goals that you mentioned in your talk, because that would be kind of that, in terms of what type of materials. And I know you mentioned community colleges, but is there a kind of drive towards K through 12 as well?
Yeah, in fact, I would like to, I don't know if Jessica would like to say a few words. Would you be willing to do that, Jessica, to say something about this?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So we did think about the K through 12 option when we were developing the idea about community colleges, but we decided to begin first with community colleges, minority serving institutions, and historically Black colleges and universities first, primarily just because they're slightly closer to our postgraduate researcher focus. So we thought we'll begin there and inevitably learn a lot of lessons and develop a platform which is appropriate for sharing lesson plans and essentially get our technical capabilities, sharing those resources up to standard first, and then reach out to possibly younger ages.
And I'll just add that we have been on a more informal basis, certainly through our assistant librarian, Samia Khalaf Kafafi, engaging with teachers and also librarians who are working in schools to see if they can activate and use the collections. And that's been more sort of experimental, but I think it's allowed us to think about the potential. And once we have these curricular guides as well in multiple languages, they could be repurposed also within locally here within Jordan and for other places as well.
And I would like to add a few things from our point of view, if I may. Okay, I think it didn't really come across very much during my presentation, but activities such as the Syrian Heritage Archive project, they have been embedded in the last 5 years or so in this larger package of activities that's really aimed at let's say propping up or building up civilian initiatives, capacities and skills in the region, in the Near East, in the Middle East, in North Africa. That's where all the investment went, and it has been an attempt to improve the situation there locally from a number of different approaches. And these data digitization and archival projects, they're just one aspect of it. All of the technologies that you have seen in my presentation, the geoinformation systems technologies, etc., all of that, for example, has also been taught to people in the region. So we have had very intense teaching programs. We used to actually be able to work in the region until recently. Now everything has been moved online. But we have opened up these teaching activities also internationally, and we have had a lot of very enthusiastic feedback. And there is an extremely large need in the region to simply learn more. People want to learn. They know how important that is, and they are especially interested in the computing aspects of it, because that's the one thing. The engineering courses, that's what counts in these regions. So we try to inject archaeology and the archaeological topics into an environment where people have traditionally been taught engineering skills, and we try to build up on these skills and to teach them digital tools for cultural heritage. And this has been quite fruitful so far. And that is perhaps the largest aspect of this 0 Hour and ArcaNet initiative. Yeah.
Thank you, Benjamin. And I just wanted to add something on that with the technical issue. I think one of the things with our databases is they can be quite complex. And of course, when you're dealing with things that are maybe geared towards school educators, the kinds of tools that are needed need to be tailored for those users, and it can be quite challenging for them. These resources effectively have to be rethought in a way to make them more usable or selective for, say, educational or community purposes. Although you can still just access the main database and get more information, but as a starting point, I feel that they can be quite complex.
Yeah, Jack, just to follow up on that briefly, at the OI, we've done, as part of some of our grants, a number of focus group studies, and we've even put in a few grant applications to expand our tools to K through 12 audiences and others. And what you're saying right just then is actually exactly what we've experienced. That is, one, it's hard to make a tool that works well for every audience. And to go back to what Zainab was sort of saying, that's one reason it's good to have a lot of overlap, but it's also good, as some of the questions in the chat are pointing out, that if we can make this data more open and available, other people can also put together tools, especially if we can incorporate, APIs into our databases, that other people then can create their own tools for those purposes. It's very hard, for example, for, let's say, a K through 12 teacher to come into the OI's digital archives and just put something together for a lesson plan. There's not enough metadata wrapped around it for what they need. So, for example, I always remember in one of our focus groups, somebody asked, what if I come in and search Boy King, right? They wanted to find King Tut stuff. And well, they're not going to find anything on Boy King in our database because that's not the type of data that we're capturing there, the sort of Wikipedia style data. So yeah, I think we need a variety of projects. And I think also there are some limitations. It's hard for one project to be open to every audience and perfect for every audience. We obviously do our best, but I think one of the things that we can do is make our technologies as available and easy to use as possible. And then other audiences can create their own tools from that.
Thank you, Foy. I see that Matt Sabat is here, and also from MIT, from ArcaNet. Welcome, Matt. And also I'm seeing a message from Michael Toller as well here. And I don't know if this is, perhaps we can bring in this question here from Michael. Michael, would you want to actually ask the question? Can you?
Sure. Yeah, I was just basically wondering on that point of the complementarity of the resources, and sure, there's some duplication, but each of these is also unique and important in its own way, and also has resources that are not duplicated. So I'm wondering about it's something we're looking at right now in ArcNet development, how we can most effectively take advantage of making resources able to interact with one another, or at least making it easier for users of one resource to discover the other resources.
Okay. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? I think that idea of I know that one of the topics, Michael, and everyone, is in databases, like federation of data, and how can you bring different resources together? So you had one mega database that brought in all of the images from all of these different databases, and then you can find exactly what you want. But of course, we're suffering in a way from, we're drowning in data. There's almost too much data. So how do you make sense of it all? But are there any thoughts on that, on how different resources can share across or reinforce or support each other?
I have a few observations on that topic. A lesson that we have learned in the last 20 years or so at the German Archaeological Institute is that data increases exponentially, but the time you need to produce good data and the effort you need to spend and the money you put into it, that's still the same as 20 years ago. It's just still as expensive to put an image up there. Even now it's a much better image than 20 years ago, but it's still as expensive to add decent metadata to it. So what we see is a divergence of data here. The volume of data that has poor or no metadata, or it grows very, very quickly, whereas the volume of well-documented, well-linked data, it increases only, let's say, linearly. Yeah, it does increase, but not exponentially. So that's one thing. The economics of it are really a major aspect, and we don't know how to improve the economics of it. We simply don't have the recipe for it at this point. Of course, we have done the usual stuff, you know, artificial intelligence, etc., etc. But you know, let's be realistic about it. Why does Google have such great search results? Because they're all so clever? No, because billions of people work for them. We all put in free work for them. Every time you click on a Google search result, their algorithm takes note and creates a connection between the search term you entered and the website you clicked on. So we do this sort of work unpaid that would need to be done for our image data collections, for example. And it's a real problem to keep up with these technological developments, and especially with the promises of these technological developments. And then when you talk about manual linking, then we are in spheres like, you know, linked open data and the semantic internet. I've heard these words been thrown around at conferences for 20 years now. They are certainly very interesting academic concepts, but all I can see is still the same sort of work and expense that's involved in database building and database linking that was already there 20 years ago. And so, yes, I'm absolutely all for linking data. I'm all for it, absolutely. I think that what we should do is we should reduce the technological redundancy. We should try to perhaps see if we can find common technological platforms so that effort and resources are not spent on building redundant technology and instead spent on non-redundant data management. That might be a way forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Benjamin. And I think that issue of how do you make the images? So, I mean, basically, if you did rather than going into the database itself, you did an image search on Google, and it came up with an image that's in your database, and then it would link to it. So making it searchable. So using IIIF or other formats that enable those image searches to appear in general searches.
I think that we should get much better at searching, at search engines, and at understanding how good search works. I think that might be a way forward as well. I think that's just something that we have to look into much more, and that is a way that we can see at the DRE as well. So we're putting a lot of resources into at least an internal search, but there the major challenge is that you have a very intimate connection between usage rights and licenses and search results. So whatever records are hidden, because they can't be made publicly available, they will never appear in any search result. So even our internal users, they could start a search engine across all of our systems, and they would never be sure that they're actually seeing all of the possible hits, because if they're just lacking user rights or permissions on one of our systems, those things will never show up in the search results. These are very, very problematic things that are not only technological problems.
I think we have about 17 minutes on the workshop still. There are a few questions that have come in from the chat. And I'm just seeing one here, which I'd like to read out, which is from Chuck Jones, who's asking, do sites illustrated in these projects link to Pleiades? So that's an online resource. And it just brings up that question of like, if we have more discoverability across different platforms, if we are referring to each other, but does anyone just use Pleiades or have reference to their project in
Our
Pleiades?
gazetteer links to it. Our gazetteer links to it. We have a good cooperation going on with Pleiades. That's of course also an example for data which is very well structured, purposefully and minimalistically. It's just Pleiades is just a very good example of purposefully created data structures, and that works really well. Yeah.
Thank you. And I have another question here from Andy Vaughan. It's actually two questions. There was one question to Foy and Anne. It's concerning the imagination aspect, which was brilliant, a really interesting aspect. Is there room or risk for interpretation when using old photos, especially when digital reconstruction is used? Is there any risk there?
Sure. So I'll just jump in. Anne, feel free to add onto this. So Andy was also asking, like, how would we define imagination? So when I look at that, I'm really thinking about any interpretation produced by humans, whether that interpretation is written down in text form, whether it's taking a photograph, making a painting, or an image in your mind. To me, all of those are part of what make up the human imagination when I'm using that term in this regard. And that's sort of part of what the point of what we wanted to bring up in our paper is that all of us are working so hard to make this stuff available, to use these new technologies, to use cutting edge technologies. And what I want to think about sometimes, or at least try to reflect on, is what will our work that we're doing now in presenting this type of information and data, how will that affect the imagination of future generations about this data? And so one way that we were looking at that for ourselves is, of course, how we imagine sites based on previous technologies like black and white archival photographs, aerial photos, etc. And that's had an effect on how we imagine these things. So yeah, I think that in terms of what Andy has raised, for me personally, this is just my personal opinion, yes, there's room for interpretation. All of this is interpretation. When we put a site mosaic together, or in many cases, these images that we've put together in mosaics, they're not even taken on the same day, at the same time, etc. That's all part of adding interpretation to it. So certainly there's room for that. The main thing that we have to be aware of is just to be critical about it. So we know what we're putting together, and we're thinking about what type of effect that could have when we put that out to audiences, whether they're academic audiences, K through 12 audiences, etc. I mean, we know from all the critical work that our colleagues are doing in this area that often there's a bunch of bundled up biases and assumptions that you don't necessarily recognize. So what I'm trying to do is just reflect on all the stuff that, all the great work that we're talking about today. Well, what effect is that going to have moving forward on how people imagine these sites or think about the peoples who live around them or who lived in them in the ancient world, et cetera. So yeah, I think there's room for it, but for it to be critically informed. I don't know if Anne has.
Well, just another point to the idea of the imagination and the user. I think there's also a subset of user which were highly influenced by visual culture at the moment. And so when you're involved in these outreach projects, K through 12, exhibitions like the one we highlighted, just making it very transparent how these things are built and created, because people are just coming at them from that purely visual standpoint with varying degrees of background information.
Great, thank you, Anne and Foy. And there's another question from Andy, which is for Gabe. Gabriel, do your compilation photographs have a danger for the researcher's imagination to reconstruct reliefs that are part interpretation? Can you show what is interpretation, what is quantifiable reconstruction?
That's actually a very good point. Well, these compilation photographs, as you say, Andy, they are like, they have a certain amount of, one could say, like built-in like distortion or error in them because they are based on these very specific photographic principles. And so in a way they are, you know, a view of the rock relief that one can't see with the naked eye, you know? And so really the question is, you know, how can we perhaps, I don't know, like use all of these like diverse methods to, you know, create a more contextual view of the site in situ. I don't know, Zainab, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I have many thoughts on that. I mean, as an art historian who works on the image and the power of the image, I've been acutely aware of the role that representation plays here, especially with digital documentation that looks so slick and so realistic. And we've been very careful, and that's why I mentioned in the chat that in our publication, I actually addressed this rather extensively, that we have to be cautious not to think that digitization or photogrammetry or these new tools that we use, that they are somehow a neutral and objective point of view. To my mind, they're no different than the images that Anne and Foy so brilliantly pointed out are part and parcel of their own time and the imperial domination of that era. There's no question in my mind that digital documentation, things like drone photography, which we also use and we didn't mention, to me, these are directly linked to the power of occupation in a place like Iraq. I'm as an Iraqi person, of course, I'm painfully aware of the fact that, that the technologies that we use are the technologies that were developed for warfare, and some of them were actually developed for warfare specifically in Iraq and in the lead up to the war. So it's not an irony to consider these things at all. But I mean, I think that we all need to be careful about, you know, thinking that this is some kind of a panacea, this kind of digital documentation, but yet we have to use the tools that we do have, as long as we're self-reflexive about it and we're aware of what we're doing. And it makes me wonder whether we shouldn't be more clear about that in our website, so that we don't give a false impression about exactly how our own vision comes into play when we put this material together. So I think that it would be good for us all to think about that. I also want to change the discussion a little bit, if I may, and ask more about security, because the other thing that I've been working on at Columbia is that a panel was set up by my colleague at the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation about the explosion in Beirut, right? And what happened with the explosion in Beirut. And although that's not about, you know, heritage and antiquity, it overlaps with the sorts of questions that we work on. And what happened with the explosion in Beirut is that the Arab Image Foundation, which was something like 800 meters away from the site of the explosion, was heavily damaged. And so, of course, I'm concerned about security and longevity and security, and what are we all doing to protect all of this data? Have you all thought about that? Thanks.
Is anyone, if they would like to respond? And I would just add that the preservation issues are really acute, and the kinds of collections that, you know, sometimes we get donated, they could be really at-risk collections. And one of the issues is that they're at risk often regardless of where they're located. I mean, it could be in the Middle East in some parts, it could be very at risk, you know, due to conflict or other issues, but equally in someone's basement in the United States, a collection can really also be at risk. So thinking about how we think about prioritizing the preservation and finding funding and resources to be able to digitize these collections and get them available online. Any other thoughts?
It's a problem. I'm sorry, very quick one, Michael. Sorry, it's a matter of conflicting aims. As archaeologists, we know what works for preservation. Copying works. I mean, most of the stuff we study is stuff that has been preserved. If you think about a large volume of the of ancient literature, for example, Roman marble sculptures, etc., etc. If you allow copies, you will allow preservation. And now that conflicts, of course, with all sorts of other interests.
Yeah,
Michael is unmuted.
I think that's exactly right. And you know, those other interests are extremely important. You know, there's two separate issues, I guess, we're really talking about. In this, we're mostly talking about the digital, but in the case of the Arab Image Foundation, you know, that's a facility that has lots of things that have not yet been digitized, which is also the case with AKDC. And you know, there are lots of steps one can take with physical archives to mitigate risk. One can never completely eliminate risks. You know, an explosion like that is something that is completely unpredictable and has devastating impact for an extremely wide radius. So one might never think that the port would have an impact on the Arab Image Foundation. And then the other one is exactly what you said. You know, digital preservation storage is something that, you know, I hate to admit it, but even at MIT, we're just coming to grips with it's something that people haven't thought a lot about. Copies are one way to do it, and then I mean, they're the only way to do it. So, for example, you often have a distribution copy, a preservation copy, and then a complete like dark storage copy that is only used if everything else disappears. So because of course the other thing that people don't think about is degradation of digital resources. The more they're copied, the more they're used, the more the risk of file corruption, etc. So that's the purpose of this dark storage, uncompressed, you know, version. But then, as you said, I can only echo what you said. Other interests come into play, and like for example, right now with the pandemic, financing. That's an expensive thing to do, to have a really good storage chain. So, yeah.
I would just add that, you know, that whole issue of funding is so fundamental to these projects. We have so many diverse projects presented in this session. They are funded by governments, national governments. They're funded by universities, funded by federal grants, and sometimes by private funds as well, and donations. So, you know, given this fluid and flexible issue, I mean, I would say that in general, if anyone's watching from the major foundations and thinking about where they should be putting their funding in the future, is to think about digital preservation to help, because ultimately the money that is needed to keep sustaining these digital collections into the future is a growing cost for institutions, and something that is often sidelined or not fully supported, and it's a danger. Is any other thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, if I could actually just jump in on the last point. So I was attending the CLEAR's Digital Library Forum, and right afterwards they have the NDSA, so the National Digital Stewardship Alliance's conference specifically on digital preservation the last couple of days. And this is also a really key topic. And one of the sessions was essentially calling on project managers, middle level management, higher level director or dean positions to start kind of increasing the levels of funding specifically for digital preservation. So I wonder whether if anyone has any thoughts on how from our positions we might be able to encourage that or support those efforts, perhaps making not quite alliances, but maybe connections with the people who are doing the groundwork of digital preservation across universities or museums and different departments, and see if that sort of common interest could be built upon.
Mm.
I just noticed that we're running out of time. I don't know if Marta is there. Do we basically have 2 minutes? Is that right?
Yes, up until 2 minutes.
Okay, so I really think we're going to have to wrap this up, and it's clear that we have more to talk about. Perhaps this is something that we can do in the future and think about maybe another session at ASOR or maybe other venues. But I think that there is plenty to talk about, and I would like to engage this group and expand it potentially to discuss these issues further. I want to thank all of our speakers and presenters and co-authors. And I also want to thank the organizers, ASOR, and also Marta and Jared and everyone on the technical team. Thank you so much. And we're looking forward to we can actually have continued conversation in the chat, a networking section actually of the conference if we want to too. So we can also go there. But thank you so much for everything. And we're looking forward to seeing you in the flesh in the future, I hope. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Nice to meeting you.
Nice to see everyone.
Thank you.